Welcome back to the channel. We've got this one here. Mali is falling to al-Qaeda. Here's what you need to know by Warfronts. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button if you're not a subscriber already, and hit the like button while you're down there too. His video will be in the comments down, or in the description down below. You can leave a comment down there too while you're down. If you'd like, say hello. I'll say hello back maybe. Anyways, let's get on with the video.
Right now, the jihadist insurgency is trying to starve out a sovereign nation. The insurgents aren't burning the crops, they aren't poisoning the water, and they aren't killing the cattle. Instead, the al-Qaeda-linked terror organization known as JNIM is targeting the fuel, and after less than 2 months, the African nation of Mali is already on its knees. JNIM has been gaining ground for years, leaving a bloody trail of regime soldiers and Russian mercenaries in their wake. Mali, alongside the other nations of the embattled Sahel region, has struggled even to slow them down, let alone stop them. But now that JNIM has set its sights on Mali's energy supply, now that the insurgents have zeroed in on a critical vulnerability, they're building momentum faster than ever. Today, in the capital city of Bamako and the ancient metropolis of Timbuktu,
cutting off the gas. That's a move that Iran did back in the 80s to the United States when they tried to deprive the United States of cheap oil, but they accidentally raised gas prices and pissed us off. Mali, I guess, does not have that power to stop them. They don't have the ability just to
running out, and
have different oil sources.
Zero, expect all hell to break loose. The fuel must flow. The organization known as JNIM, short for Jama'at Nasr al-Islam wal Muslimin, has...
I don't know, guys. What do you think? Does that sound Muslim or Islamic to you? I can't tell. That doesn't seem... I don't know. I can't tell. Not at all.
Thriving in the nation of Mali for nearly a decade, estimated to comprise well over 5,000 fighters today. By even conservative estimates, JNIM is a light and highly mobile asymmetric insurgency. The organization is present across much of the Sahel region, the part of Africa where blazing hot Sahara sands transition slowly into the tropical savanna. But in the nation of Mali, landlocked, sparsely populated and home to a bit over 23 million people, JNIM is at their very strongest. Today, JNIM is easy.
Africa continuing to be a country victim of everyone, the entire world. And yet they are given more things from the entire world than any other continent. It is kind of insane, the double-edged sword that has been dealt to Africa. Like, they get more help because they need the help, but then they can't help themselves when it comes down to the end, and they get taken advantage of, they get taken over, they get killed by insurgents. They have just, unbridled levels of the corruption throughout basically every government that most countries in Africa have ever had. It is kind of crazy to watch.
The largest and best armed insurgency in the entire Sahel region, and it's on the short list of the most dangerous and the most capable non-state actors on Earth. Although it's technically an affiliate of al-Qaeda, it operates independently and chooses overwhelmingly to pursue its own goals, taking over villages and towns all across rural Mali, collecting taxes, extorting residents, and using those funds to accelerate their jihadist movement. And while JNIM currently lacks the strength to take the nation of Mali outright, the Malian government has not been able to wage war against JNIM effectively. The insurgents are at their strongest out in the countryside, where they can orchestrate ambushes, force battles on favorable ground, or blend into the landscape as they see fit. And when they're on the offensive, they frequently attack in massive swarms on motorbikes where their speed, mobility, and numbers are enough to overwhelm the forces that they're trying to fight. At times, JNIM attacks have led to the slaughter of dozens or even over 100 Malian soldiers at a single location, and for years they've been able to attack fortified military bases directly.
See, terroristic forces like this being neighborly, being on your borders and invading your country are the exact reason why it's a great thing to have a Second Amendment like the United States.
In the late 2010s, while Janim was still finding its feet, it was kept in check, at least somewhat, with the assistance
And it's also why you never let anyone take your Second Amendment rights from you.
of Western military advisors and airstrikes. But after Mali's current military regime assumed control of the nation in a coup, Western forces were booted out and Russian paramilitaries, specifically the notorious Wagner Group, were invited in. Wagner, like Malian soldiers themselves, proved unable to stem the tide of Janim attacks, and in one instance, Janim worked together with local Tuareg militants to slaughter somewhere between 50 and 80 Russian mercenaries during a sandstorm at the Battle of...
Those Wagner Group Russians, those guys are nothing to joke about. So losing that many in a fight, that's impressive for these guys. I give them credit.
It came as a bit of a surprise to global analysts when, on the 3rd of September, Janim announced a change of strategy. In a video posted online, Janim's head spokesman announced that effective immediately, it was going to impose and enforce a ban of all fuel imports into Mali. One major fuel transshipment company, Dar Transport, was warned directly that its trucks and the trucks of its subsidiaries were now subject to attack if they were seen on Malian roads. The mid-sized city of Kayes and the town of Niora de Sahel were to be placed under targeted blockades where no non-residents could come in and no current residents could go out. Now,
I don't like that.
It's never a good thing when a powerful jihadist insurgency declares a ban on any type of goods entering.
It's never good when a jihadi type of government or insurgency group tells you that, hey, you can't have these things and you can't leave and no one can come in. That's a really bad sign. That's a sign they're ready to kill you all because they have effectively boxed you all in and rendered your fuel supplies useless.
A given country. But for Janim to unilaterally blockade fuel imports to Mali, this was an especially salient threat. Mali has next to no petroleum harvesting capacity on its own soil and could only produce oil in negligible amounts using tiny proven reserves that haven't been worth the cost of extraction. Instead, Mali imports basically all of its energy supplies from abroad, from Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, and Mauritania, with Senegal and...
See, this is why African nations really need to stick up for themselves and build their own fucking infrastructures. Like, Jesus. You shouldn't have to buy your power from your neighbors. You should, with a country or a continent like Africa where you have so many different countries that are so rich in resources, sell some of your resources off in a good area and then use the money instead of enriching yourselves as a leader. You got to build infrastructure. You got to build up things to, encourage jobs and make your countries great. Not fuck it up.
Côte d'Ivoire accounting for almost 95% of all imports by themselves. Mali, of course, has strategic fuel reserves. It's not as if the nation is simply attempting to do it day by day and sustaining its national energy infrastructure. Unfortunately, however, those reserves are intended to compensate for regional shortages or isolated supply problems that could pop up over the course of ordinary business. If the entire nation were forced to rely on those reserves without rationing, then Mali would
probably
be able
last
to keep
very, very short
for
long.
about 3 days.
Yeah, very short while.
The nation under siege. Now, almost as soon as it had announced...
I like this. The setup, the circles, areas around it. I bumped my mic's mute button. But yeah, I like that, how it's all set up. It's real good looking.
Janim's fighters leapt into action to prove their ability to enforce the new series of rules that it laid out. Now, the group started to capture fuel tankers on the road and set them alight. It started ambushing convoys where tankers were traveling in groups or under military escort. And if the group's fighters were greeted with resistance, they showed no hesitation in wiping out those troops who had attempted to oppose them. Because the vast majority of Mali's fuel enters the country from a small number of checkpoints in either the far south or the far west and then travels along predictable paths in areas where Janim wields influence, tankers have proved exceptionally difficult to hide and very easy for Janim to intercept. If a tanker is traveling unguarded, it takes no more than a couple of fighters on motorbikes or a makeshift roadblock to capture it, and even guarded convoys are at a disadvantage, moving through zones where the jihadists can leverage roadside bombs and attack from all directions. According to the Malian Petroleum Importers Association, over 100 tanker trucks were completely destroyed by Janim fighters during the month of September alone, although that number, in turn, is quite likely an undercount. In just a single attack on September the 14th, Janim fighters ambushed a convoy of several dozen tankers under military escort, defeated the military forces present, and set at least 40 of those tankers ablaze.
Sheesh!
Nor has Janim taken any interest in protecting the fuel that it
They're not even
captures
using the
once it's in
fuel,
possession
they're
of the
just
tankers.
blowing it up
In
and
another
burning
country,
it.
dealing with another insurgency,
Why?
national governments might be forced to buy
Use
back
it for
fuel
some
that's
good.
been stolen
Sell it
from
to
them,
another
with the
nation.
insurgents choosing to hold that fuel for ransom or even sell it off to the highest bidder. Janim,
That's what
however,
they
appears
should
to
do.
have no interest in the revenues that it could gain by positioning itself as a fuel broker. The insurgents have neither the required manpower to protect large volumes of fuel nor the facilities to store it safely, and likely suspect they'd become vulnerable to government counterattack if they can't stay mobile.
Yeah, maybe.
Moreover,
But,
Janim
I mean, if
spent
you
other
get
ways to make
sources
profit
you can
without
sell too
accepting
quick.
nearly as much risk as the group's fighters
do
have
it.
done by coming after Mali's fuel supply. The intent is very clearly to deprive Mali's government and its people and ensure that they can't obtain fuel under any circumstance. Truck drivers may be ransomed in the event that they're spared from summary execution, but those are living hostages. They're far easier to either transport or conceal than an entire fuel truck. While Janim hasn't gone out of its way to explain its objectives, it hasn't exactly been difficult for either the Malian government or international onlookers to piece together the basics of what they're trying to achieve. For one thing, a Malian military without fuel is a military that's on a much more level playing field against Janim. No heavy fighting vehicles, and perhaps not even armored jeeps and trucks at their disposal. For another, the blockade is just a way to drive a wedge.
Yeah, having fuel is key to your logistics of any army. No fuel means no powerful armored vehicles, no vehicles of any kind. You basically will run to a halt or have to go backwards in technology and be completely outmatched by your opponents. And yeah, the playing field has definitely been leveled by the jihadi terrorist group who doesn't like them and wants to eliminate Mali, take them over, and probably do some pretty bad things if they get in there.
Between the Malian government and a range of other parties at once. Those potential dissolution parties include the transshipment companies, who are usually responsible for managing the fuel that accounts for over 40% of Mali's entire volume of imported goods. They include the resource extraction companies, especially the foreign companies that require fuel to operate and trusted the Malian government to ensure stable and predictable deliveries, and perhaps most importantly of all, they include ordinary civilians, especially the middle-income and wealthy people living in Mali's cities who've been aware of the creeping Janim insurgency and will now feel its effects more than ever. Finally, by imposing such a complete blockade of fuel across Mali, the jihadists demonstrate their sheer offensive potency and the full extent of their power to wreak havoc upon an entire nation. As we mentioned previously, Janim is thought to comprise only around 5,000 to 6,000 fighters across the entire Sahel region, and almost certainly no more than 10,000. Mali's armed forces number 40,000, plus thousands of paramilitaries, and at least several hundred fighters from Russia's Africa Corps, which recently replaced the Wagner Group. For Janim to be capable of a blockade on this scale, it validates the absolute worst fears that ordinary Malians might have about their government. Despite their massive numeric advantage, the nation's leaders and their military have simply been unable to intervene when a ragtag bunch of gunmen on motorbikes decided to lay down the law. As of the time of writing, it's been about 6 weeks since the blockade across Mali went into effect, and the repercussions have long since started to show. Residents report that most civilian gas stations are entirely empty. People who depend on their cars and motorbikes have been unable to work, study, or care for their families, and on the rare occasion that gasoline is delivered, panic often leads to fistfights and occasionally even shootouts.
I wouldn't
Fuel
doubt
companies
it.
in the surrounding nations have started to refuse to send their own workers into Mali, instead hiring locals on a temporary basis to take fuel across the border and try and reach their destination for fear that the trucks could be interdicted and their drivers could be killed. The military does occasionally manage to
That could
retaliate,
definitely happen.
announcing a successful airstrike here or the killing of half a dozen insurgents there, but their victories are nowhere near enough to turn the tide. After weeks, when the government tried to keep things stable in the capital, using its reserves at the expense of the rest of the nation, they can no longer insulate the residents of Bamako from Janim's impact. Their power officials indicate that residents can expect only 6 hours of electricity a day, and that number is expected to drop again in the coming weeks. Right now, there's still enough carefully rationed fuel to ensure that the country doesn't shut down completely, and a delivery of 300 fully loaded fuel tankers traveling in a convoy under heavy guard on the 7th of October seems to have bought Mali a bit more time. But the collapse is coming sooner than later.
Yep.
And although
I
Mali went so far as to try and negotiate directly with Janim to meet its conditions, those negotiations now appear to have collapsed.
Just a quick pause to share something with you that we are rather...
I mean, you can't negotiate with terrorists, so you're going to have to figure out something elsewise other than the negotiating with them. You'll have to figure out some nation that you can negotiate with to come help you, rather than negotiating with the terrorists who are, they have all the power. If you all of a sudden have to come ask them to stop doing what they're doing, you don't have power anymore. You need to go to a nation and be like, hey, I have these raw materials that I can sell to you if you come help me get rid of these fuckers. Like, you gotta make it an easier battle to fight.
Endgame. Now, at this point in Janim's blockade, it is possible to deny the success that the terrorist organization has achieved thus far. Mali isn't broken yet, but it's on the path for its fuel stores to completely run out, and simply expecting that the government can orchestrate more fuel convoys of a similar size to the last one is not a winning bet. Janim's greatest strength has always been its ability to adapt to changing circumstances, and the group is almost certain to adapt again if convoys of hundreds of tankers at once become a recurring problem. Besides that, any other option at Mali's disposal to turn this situation around would require Mali to be a far more competent and formidable counterinsurgent force than it's demonstrated thus far. But there's still one open question around Janim's blockade, and that's the issue of the terrorists' endgame. While Janim has issued a handful of demands in exchange for a lifting of the blockade, those demands simply don't seem to be the sort of thing that would justify Janim going to the lengths that it has. The group is demanding things like a prisoner exchange, or a new rule that would mandate women to wear veils on buses, the sort of thing.
I mean, they probably want to implement some Islamic Sharia law. And if they don't agree, they'll just want you dead. Like the typical Islamic, radicals.
That Janim could probably extract as a concession by, say, taking a few important hostages or besieging a vulnerable military base. If that was all Janim wanted to achieve, then blockading fuel imports into the entire nation for more than a month straight would be an act of massive overkill. Even the rumors about Janim's initial reason to attempt a blockade, pushing back against fuel restrictions in rural areas that deprive Janim, like Janim is depriving the government now, still don't tell the full story. But although we, here at Warfronts, don't exactly have Janim's leaders on speed dial to ask them ourselves, we can draw on the observations of regional experts who suspect they've identified the higher objectives beyond the blockade. In particular, we're going to spotlight three: to raise domestic disillusionment with Mali's government, to sabotage or undermine security across the wider Sahel, and to pressure the foreign companies and governments that help to prop up Mali's military regime. On the question of disillusionment, Janim clearly understands the principle that's guided asymmetric insurgencies all across the globe. The less that ordinary people believe in their government, the more likely they are to believe in you. Although Janim can be quite brutal in the areas it controls, it's not uniformly disliked across Mali. Some communities align with Janim for religious reasons, believing in the same hardline ideology that they work to spread. Others see membership in the group as a way out of poverty. Sometimes it could be the only way for them to get out of poverty.
Yeah.
Still, others may not believe in Janim's ideology.
Like I said in a different video, one from CoffeeZilla about gambling, and the problem that, just like betting on anything creates is you get the freedom to do that. You've got some people, you get some creators who are like, I'm never going to take a gambling sponsorship, when all of a sudden you realize, oh yeah, that creator is rich as fuck. That's why you'll never take a gambling sponsorship, because you don't need it. Now, if you were someone who might be a little on the poorer side, and you're like, a gambling sponsorship would actually be life-changing money, and you take that, well, everybody has a price. That's what I like to say. Everybody has a price that they will go for whatever it is. If all of a sudden you get some hardships, medical debt piles up, and you have to do something to make a bunch of money, and you're like, well, it's not exactly aligning with all of my morals, but it's one I'm willing to compromise on, and you pick whatever item that may be, and you go with it. Because everybody has a price at some point. You will cave.
But they are happy to see somebody pushing back against Mali's military government and the foreigners that are working to exploit the country's mineral wealth. Bamako has hardly endeared itself to ordinary people recently, formally dissolving all political parties this past May and expanding crackdowns against the political opposition, the media, and ordinary protesters. And in some places, even where Janim is regarded as a threat, it's also regarded as the lesser of two evils. After years absorbing all the training and battlefield ideology of Russia's Wagner Group, Mali's government forces have become acclimatized to all manner of wartime atrocities, especially in the rural areas, and quite often targeting civilians. All those factors, in combination, were already pushing a growing number of Malians to consider aligning with Janim or even joining the group voluntarily. Now, with critical fuel supplies cut off, life across Mali is going to get harder. Circumstances for ordinary people are going to grow more dire, and the nation's government is likely to continue to prove two things simultaneously. Number one, they'll prove that they simply are not competent enough to liberate Mali from a group that is thoroughly outfoxed. And number two, they'll prove that when they do occasionally get their hands on some fuel, that fuel will be sent to the capital, the military, or foreign industry, or being intentionally withheld from Mali's own people. Whenever Janim can drive that message home and erode public faith in Bamako, it's likely to see its own fortunes rise. And then there's the rest of the Sahel, where Janim is still very active. In the neighboring...
Yeah, it's like they might only have at most like 10,000 troops, but if the other armies they're fighting have no fuel to move, they kind of can win by default, because if you're all of a sudden stuck and can't go nowhere, and you got enemies closing in, you might be more willing to be like, hey, we surrender, come talk to us, and don't murder us, please, let us out.
Nation of Burkina Faso, where things have been mostly quiet during the summer
Make a
months,
deal.
while Janim focused on Mali, the insurgents have now returned with a vengeance. On the 9th of October, Janim launched 2 attacks along a critical road to Burkina Faso's capital. In one of those attacks, 11 people were killed and 40 injured. In the other, Janim ambushed a Burkinabe military convoy where, at a minimum, no fewer than 90 soldiers were massacred. Local estimates suggest a true death toll as high as 130. In past years, Janim has launched attacks all across Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, as well as nearby Benin, and they're known to be expanding their presence into Ghana, Togo, and Côte d'Ivoire. In all those nations, Janim grows more dangerous and more effective if it can leverage nearby territory that it controls completely in a place like Mali. By diminishing the Malian government's capacity to fight back and consolidating control over rural areas by forcing the government to focus on a crisis elsewhere, Janim has given itself a secure launchpad to carry out attacks all across the region. In similar cases across modern history, this is where insurgent groups really start to gain traction, whether it's al-Qaeda setting up training camps in Central Asia, the Islamic State taking over part of Iraq and Syria, Boko Haram locking down territory in Nigeria, or any number of other instances worldwide. Finally, a severe and enduring disruption to Mali's fuel imports would allow Janim to ratchet up the pressure against foreign companies who oversee mining and other resource extraction deals across Mali's territory. Those operations are run by Chinese nationals, Russian nationals, Indian nationals, investors from the Gulf states of the Arab world, investors from elsewhere in Africa, and, judging by recent reporting, potentially a swell of new investment from the United States. Those operations are responsible for a large proportion of the income that props up Mali's government as Bamako ships away its resources in exchange for licensing deals and to cut the profits. In addition to funding the regime, those foreign investments stabilize the regime, both because all countries involved want to ensure that their profits and supply lines are secure, and because some countries like Russia send large amounts of personnel to physically ensure that those operations are not threatened. But those operations need fuel if they're going to
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna have fuel in the area, you're gonna need to be able to, or if you're gonna have troops in the area with vehicles, you're gonna need fuel to move them. Otherwise, you're gonna have just stationary guns, and that creates a target that will be attacked.
They've got to keep the lights on, they've got to operate equipment, and their people need to be able to move around both the immediate region and the rest of the country. That cannot happen if fuel tankers can't move across Mali as expected, and before very much longer, the results will start to show. Mining operations will have to begin slowing down, and in many cases could even have to pause completely. Foreign workers will grow more isolated, while mining harvests will be far harder to move and thus far harder to sell or send away for processing. The breakdown has already started,
Yep.
as shown by an incident in early October, when Mali prohibited around 70 fuel trucks from traveling to a lucrative rural gold mine run by a Canadian company, Allied Gold, where fuel was rapidly running out. JNIM is acutely aware of the interplay between these foreign operations and the security of the regime in Bamako, and over the years, JNIM has regularly threatened mines, kidnapped or killed foreign workers, and otherwise tried to make it impossible for these groups to justify staying in Mali. But never before has JNIM been able to pose this acute of a threat to foreign industry. Right now, the group has a real chance of making these kinds of operations untenable in Mali if it could just keep up the pressure, cut off the flow of resources and profits, and break these foreign partners' faith in the Malian government. Unfortunately, the grand push and pull between JNIM and Mali's leaders is all but guaranteed to harm the people caught in the middle, the millions upon millions of Malians who depend on fuel in order to survive. Depending on where this crisis goes next, JNIM's actions could prompt a swell of popular discontent against the government of Bamako, potentially bringing larger social upheaval, or, if recent events across the globe are any indication, maybe even regime change. But the more likely option, at least for now, is that the people caught between a relentless jihadist insurgency and a repressive but largely impotent military regime are going to suffer the consequences for as long as this siege continues.
And that is the biggest issue with all of these African nations that are, dying, having people getting, under Islamic rule all of a sudden because they're expanding in rapid fashion. Islam and Muslims are expanding across the globe. Globally, they're expanding so quickly, and there's got to be some kind of motive behind everything. And I don't know. I don't know what it means. I don't know why, but I know it needs to be stopped. I don't know what it'll take. Maybe Christianity will start a new round of crusades. I mean, send us back into a dark ages too, except this time they'll just slaughter every Muslim. Slaughter every Islamic jihadist on the planet. Like, it is not necessarily a religion of peace. It is known for being violent to everyone within and to its neighbors. Anyways, I will catch you with today's later video. That one's a little more fun than this, so come back later today, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.